Hello and welcome to the EdTech Stories podcast. This is my interview with Smart Technologies co-founder and former CEO Nancy Knowlton. This interview took place last year and served as the backbone for my documentary Billion Dollar Board, The Rise and Fall of the Interactive Whiteboard Industry. If you find that topic interesting, be sure to check out my 40-minute video covering smart technologies in the 2000s on the EdTech Hustle YouTube channel. And now, here's my interview with Nancy Knowlton. So today, if you walk into a classroom, you'll likely see instruction happening in front of an interactive whiteboard or an interactive flat panel. My guest today is a key figure behind this transformation. I'm thrilled to be speaking with Nancy Knowlton, the current CEO of Nureva, a company at the forefront of advanced audiovisual technology, including the groundbreaking Microsoft Mist technology. Before her role at Nureva, Nancy was the co-founder and former CEO of Smart Technologies, the Canadian company that revolutionized and essentially created the multi-billion-dollar interactive whiteboard industry. Over the past 37 years, Nancy has witnessed firsthand the profound impact interactive whiteboards have had on education and collaboration. So today, we're going to learn more about her incredible journey with smart technologies at the peak of the interactive whiteboard industry. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It is my pleasure. So what I want to do is dive right in with a question from your past. While many people know you as the first CEO of Smart Technologies and maybe the current CEO of Nureva, not many are aware of your first business venture in your hometown of Quebec. You and your brother started out by selling maple syrup. Could you share with us that experience and what it was like and how it influenced you over your career?
Well, I would say as kids, we had a very creative, energetic father. And one year, he decided that he wasn't going to make maple syrup anymore. And so we said, well, could we do that? And, my father said that we could do it and he would help. And we were big enough. My brother was almost 10 and I was 8.5. So we took on that business. My father purported to help us, but the reality was anything that was sort of technical or that really required a fine hand or had a little element of danger to it, as making maple syrup did in those days, he kind of helped us. And I can remember at the end of our sort of 2-week period coming in, flopping down on the couch and, letting out a big sigh. My father looked at my brother and me and he said, "Do you think you're finished?" And we said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "You haven't sold anything. You're not done." And so we packed up our little wagon, we dragged it down into the town from our farm and just started to sell our maple syrup. And so, as an 8.5-year-old kid, I ended up with a few $100s and really loved the concept of business.
I mean, what else would a couple of Canadian kids sell, right? Like maple syrup. Totally makes sense. So after your maple syrup venture wrapped up, there's another fascinating aspect of your background that many might not know. You were a very accomplished women's basketball player. During your time at Bishop's College, you were not only the leading scorer in Canada, but also held the highest scoring average. Can you tell us more about your basketball career and maybe how the skills and lessons from sports have influenced your professional life?
Well, the things that served me well in sports, serve me well in business. And that is kind of the relentless pursuit of, it's not so much success, but it's achieving a goal. And it's not so much the destination, it's kind of how you get there. I'm like the proverbial greyhound who chases the rabbit around the racetrack. It's not catching the rabbit that's motivational to me. It's the pursuit. And so, when I was in university, I'd be in the gym on Friday night and Saturday night, shooting free throws, working out, doing a bunch of things. And then, of course, I'd go off to the pub and join my friends. But I'd put in 2 to 3 hours of work before I would do that. And Today I would say when I get up in the morning, I put in 2 to 3 hours of work probably before a normal person would get up. And back in the day, when we were starting Smart, there were huge numbers of things to do. And we always felt that we could accomplish some things while our competitors were sleeping. So, same kind of mindset in the early days of Smart, same mindset today.
All right, so speaking about SMART, that's where we are going to go next and where we're going to spend the majority of this interview discussing. So eventually you earned your undergraduate business degree from Bishop's University and an MBA from St. Mary's University in Nova Scotia. Your career in business and accounting brought you to Calgary, where you met your husband, David Martin, at the Calgary Stampede of all places. Looks like a fun and memorable event. So you two quickly married, and soon after you embarked on a business venture together, somewhat spontaneously. The story goes that you were driving down the New York State Highway into Montreal, a drive I know well as a New Yorker, and during this seemingly, unremarkable trip, David shared his idea for what would become the interactive whiteboard. I want you to take us back to that moment. How did Dave pitch the idea to you, and did you immediately see the potential, or did it take some convincing?
So Dave first articulated the idea for what became SmartBoard when we were driving from Montreal to New York City. And we were going to meet with ITT Corporation. They had a flat panel display that they had developed in Tempe, Arizona. And at that time, ITT was rationalizing its business and really trying to divest of all non-core assets. And so this flat panel was non-core. And so I asked Dave the fateful question, so what would we do with that technology? Now, Dave had already had a substantial career in technology, and it was in the course of kind of looking at what he was going to do next that prompted him to reach out to one of his friends who worked at ITT Corporation. And he was introduced to this flat panel based upon SMETIC A technology. So anyway, so in answer to my question, Dave gave this very elaborated answer on what he termed at the time interactive facsimile. I think when people come up with new ideas, they always have to ground it a little bit in what they already know. And Dave had come out of a telecom background, and so facsimile machines were very familiar to him. And he had imagined that this LCD panel could project an image onto a giant touch screen, and in front of a group of people, there could be a level of interaction with digital information that would simultaneously and immediately be shown and manipulated at a remote location. So kind of a long explanation, but he had a great way of thinking about what he would do with that new flat panel technology.
So it sounds like you were totally on board from the start, right?
I was totally on board from the start. When I had met my husband less than a year prior to that time, I was pretty much at the stage of leaving my job as a chartered accountant. I had money, and I knew that I could survive without a paycheck for probably 3 years. So I'd been quite diligent in trying to get my plan off the ground. What I didn't have was an idea. And when Dave articulated that idea, I really did see the immediate application for it. And, sometimes you need an idea that's really out there versus something that is kind of adjacent to something already in the market. I didn't think that something that was kind of obvious would have much opportunity. And so it was the kind of radicalness of the idea that attracted me.
So, with that idea in mind, you and David set out to create the interactive whiteboard. David focused on securing the necessary patents while you used your business background to write the business plan. This plan involves selling mainly in-focus LCD projectors, using the profits to fund further development of the interactive whiteboard. By 1991, David had secured the patent, and shortly after, you developed a prototype. Initially, it was a front projection SMARTBOARD, and then a rear projection model came later. One of the first public demonstrations of this technology was at the 1991 Comdex conference, I believe. Can you share what the initial reaction was from the people at this conference who were seeing this innovative technology for the first time ever?
So our first showing actually was at InfoComm in January that year in Orlando, and Comdex came much later that year in November. And I can tell you that, there was a level of inquisitiveness, puzzlement, but no orders. So, it's in the early stages, you really do have to paint the picture for people, help them understand, why would I ever need that? I travel for business, all of those sort of negative reactions to it, but at the same time, a little bit curious about what it is that they were seeing. It was in the early part of 1992 when we were at pretty much back-to-back telecom events in the DC area, where Dave was in deep technical conversation with a couple of people, and I saw their wives kind of standing off to the side, and I said, "Hey, would you like to see what we have here?" And they said, "Oh, we're not technical," and I kind of laughed and said, "Neither am I, but let me show you what it is that we have." Then both of the women were teachers. And they said, both of them, after receiving an explanation of the product, "I don't have the money for this, but I could sure see how I would use this in my classroom." And that was one of the most positive things that we had, no concern for the cost, really focusing in on what the use case was and how they could use that tool to really energize their classroom and learning and student engagement. So that was really the reaction that set us off in a whole different course. So away from the interactive facsimile concept into the interactive teaching and learning environment.
I understand that at one of these events, you had a significant interaction with Les Vadez, who was Intel's employee number 3. At the time, in his role at Intel, he was interested in reaching out to other companies and investing in them. Can you talk a little bit about how this interaction changed the trajectory of your company?
Yeah, it was funny, that was at Comdex in 91, and Les stood outside our booth. It was a very modest booth, 10 by 10, and had quite a studied look on his face and just kind of observed and watched for a bit and came up and introduced himself to Dave. And in the course of explaining who he was, had just said, our CEO, Andy Grove, is here at Intel delivering the keynote, and what Andy has spoken about as being possible in the future, you're showing already. So that really sparked his interest in making the investment in SMART at the time. That was a real pivotal moment for us. We had bootstrapped the finances of the company. We had sold another company's product in Canada to generate some profits that we could reinvest. But the Intel relationship was so much more than just the money that they gave us. They gave us a sense of confidence. They ratified our belief in really getting out there ahead of the technology curve, ahead of where most people were. And they opened the door in many ways to many other people within Intel. And anytime we had a question where we needed some advice and input, it was just readily available. They invited us to the Intel CEO conferences, which were 2, 3, and 4-day events, which were high value, high energy, great connections, and just total inspiration to us.
Yeah, and I remember in my research an interview that I saw with Dave, and he stated that with the help of Les and Intel, that while Smart Technologies was set up like a smaller private company, you structured it like a public company. The setup with a board and formal governance that must have been helpful for you as you grew.
Yeah, exactly. And I would tell you that so much of the conversation with the Intel people just was at a very high standard of, ethical behavior, responsible behavior, and they lived everything that they spoke and were just tremendous role models in business for us.
So it sure sounds like things were off to a good start, and you both saw education as a promising area. But you'd soon hit some turbulence with your business plan. The distribution deal for the LCD projectors, which accounted for 97% of your profits, fell through after a reorganization and in focus. This was critical because the revenue from those sales were reinvested in the company and helped the development of the SMARTBOARD. So without that income, your company was in the red, became insolvent, forcing you to juggle finances just to pay the bills. I know the situation led you to seek outside investment, and in an old blog post, you mentioned that you approached over 40 investors, ranging from family and friends to local contacts in Calgary, and even some in Silicon Valley, and yet you were rejected every single time. So while Intel saw potential in you, why do you think that these other investors that you went to did not share the same confidence or the vision that you had in your company?
Some of the things that people told us, they didn't understand the application for the product. Some investors or prospective investors told us that if we got some other money, then they would follow, as if they're lemmings and could only follow a herd or whatever. And still others, would say, I just don't get it. Others would say, you're not located in Silicon Valley. I don't invest outside Silicon Valley. Still others say zero interest in education. And our sales in the early days just did not take off. They were pretty flat, and it took really quite a while for us to reach that inflection point and have rapid sales growth. So, I kind of get it. People were careful. It's not maybe like some of the more recent past where the large sums of money are really sort of thrown at almost any idea. People were careful. And, we were unproven. We had in one case, somebody said, oh, you've never gone bankrupt. I don't invest in anybody until they've had a bankruptcy. And we said, oh my gosh, we're Canadian. We never want to go bankrupt. And so, just a whole series of, I would say, very fortunate rejections, because in hindsight, what that caused us to do was to be very careful in vetting really ideas. You have a million ideas and you need to whittle them down to, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And in those days, it really related to largely marketing and sales strategies as well as the product direction. So the lack of funding really did prompt us to make good choices.
Yeah, and this is something that I didn't know, and the part of your story that I found the most inspiring. At this challenging time when your business was almost insolvent, you had lawyers and bankers suggesting you consider folding the company, and despite these pressures and the difficulty in finding outside investment, you and David kept going, and it would have been reasonable to think about taking a different approach or pursuing something else, but you persisted. And what I'm wondering is, what was your mindset at this time, and what gave you the determination to keep going despite all of these challenges?
Well, there were probably a few things, something that may surprise people, but we had taken some small amounts of money from friends. And, a number of friends had given us sort of $30,000, $25,000. And it was just an impossibility to just write off their money. We just personally couldn't do that. At the same time, we were making the occasional sale here and there, just enough to kind of keep us afloat. So, and what I should say, when we lost the distribution rights to the InFocus business, our strategy was to get even closer and become a reseller. So not the distributor, but an actual reseller of their product. And that coupled with sort of the minor sales that we had of our own product, that was enough to allow us to get by. And, it's awfully encouraging to have a customer buy your product and tell you how transformative it has been in their organization. And so it was, that combination of not letting friends down and the positive impact or commentary that we were getting from customers on the impact that our product was making that kind of kept us going.
And as we'll discuss, that feedback from customers is going to be crucial in the future direction of smart technologies. But at that point, by the mid to late 1990s, Smart saw a major growth in three key areas, that being education, business, and government. There were notable clients like Disney Imagineering, Coca-Cola, NASA, and even Chrysler that were using SMARTBOARDs and other products as well. Additionally, the U.S. government and governments from Japan and the United Kingdom also adopted your interactive whiteboards, leading to the establishment of offices in Washington, D.C., Germany, Tokyo, and other locations. So with this increase in sales and revenue, you were able to grow, add staff, create new products, and continually refine your SMARTBOARD. From the mid-2000s to around 2010, the growth that Smart experienced was remarkable. Depending on the year and the source, it seems like you captured anywhere from 40 to 70% of the interactive whiteboard market. So with this incredible success, especially in a competitive field like EdTech, were there any particular strategies or approaches you employed that were especially effective in achieving this level of market dominance?
At the time, we did reflect on why we were accomplishing so much and why we were so successful. And part of it was to not sort of get too big for our britches and imagine that this would just keep rolling. We actually wanted to know what was working. And what I would say was the number one strategy that we accomplished or that we were following was deep customer understanding and engagement. And I had a background as a university professor. I did that for 4 years, part of it while I was finishing my MBA, and then part of it part-time, if you can believe it, while I was Smart, which was incredibly challenging. But I had a pretty good understanding of education, as did so many others who were working within the company. We focused on a lot of classroom visits, getting our products into the hands of teachers and asking them for their feedback, and then relentlessly working on delivering a product and experience that really matched what our customers really needed to do their jobs well. And, it wasn't just kind of sitting back and being casual about things. It was very deliberate, very, I would say, with a great deal of insight. These days, we call it, user experience. And in those days, it would be kind of characterized as, hey, it was just in a classroom and you wouldn't believe what I saw. The teacher kept walking back and forth and had to do this. And, just relaying a small thing like that to our development team, they said, we should make that menu switchable from side to side. I want to say, in the big scheme of things, that sounds trivial. But it wasn't, because it exhibited a deep understanding of how our customers wanted to use the interactive whiteboard. And what we did was really create an application called Smart Notebook that allowed teachers to do the kinds of things in their classroom, and the students actually using the notebook application as well to further the learning experience in the classroom. So, I think we did a lot of things very well.
Yeah, for sure. During that time, I think one aspect that really resonated with teachers was the notebook software because it was so intuitive for teachers that they immediately felt comfortable using it. You could have the best software, but if it's too complicated, teachers simply just won't use it. And I think Notebook hit the right balance of functionality and ease of use. There were also some really nice interactive aspects of the hardware and software, such as the smartboard being able to differentiate between touches, such as writing with a blue pen versus a red pen, or using your finger to write or your fist to erase. And that even allowed teachers to use different items like a tennis ball or a pointer. These are features that I believe were missing in other interactive whiteboard software at the time. And I think that the seamless integration of hardware and software really set the smartboard apart from other devices and contributed to its success. So, can you share more about how these technological advancements were developed and how they impacted the adoption of smartboards in education?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, and it amplifies the point that I was making about the user experience. Right at the very start of the time when we were entering into the development of the Smartboard Interactive Whiteboard, we met a distance education coordinator, Don McDonnell, at the University of Ottawa. And he told us something that we've never forgotten, and that is, when a teacher is standing at the front of the classroom, she's only got about 5% of her brain available for operating the products or the technologies in the classroom. 95% of her focus has to be on the lesson material. And so what he was urging us to do and encouraging us to do was to make it easy, to make it mindless so that they didn't have to sort of juggle too many things mentally and then detract from really the main purpose of being there, and that is teaching and learning.
I alluded to some of the competitors. As Smart started to succeed, you noticed some of these competitors entering the marketplace. Larger companies like 3M and Hitachi introduced their own versions of interactive whiteboards, and startups like Promethean and InterWrite also emerged. But despite this competition, Smart maintained a huge market share, which is estimated at around 60 to 70%, which was roughly double to that of your nearest competitor. I know that Dave once described Smart as the 800-pound gorilla in the market in an interview for the Alberta Business Hall of Fame. You can still see it on YouTube, actually. So why do you think that despite the growing competition, Smart's business path remained largely unaffected?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. We learned this actually very early on. When we got a start in a school, if we had our products in 3 or 4 classrooms, we just knew that that whole school was going to go smart. In marketing and sales terminology is land and expand. So we won those early customers. We did a great job in supporting them. And so as they thought about filling up the rest of their classrooms, it was just going to go with smart products. So being first, being best really did matter. And then as some of the very large government tenders started to happen, we had strong advocates talking about our products. So as one example, Mexico decided to initiate a project driven by President Vicente Fox. He was trying to keep children interested in staying in schools. And so they spent a lot of time looking at what was going on at that time to be what was the largest interactive whiteboard deployment in the world was in the UK. And they just got so many positive reports on Smart. They had their own experience, of course. We've been selling in the country, very small volumes, but still present in Mexico for quite some time. And we won the majority of that deployment as well. So, having happy customers really does beget more customers. And, it was something that we learned very early on, just delight customers and every interaction, every experience, listen very hard to them, and good things will follow.
Your last answer got me thinking, so I'm going to go a bit off script with a question I've always wondered about. Given Smart's significant growth in the mid 2000s, were there any overtures or ideas to partner with one of the big tech giants? I know that after you left Smart, companies like Google and Microsoft introduced their own versions of interactive whiteboards. Neither were very successful. But were there any discussions about partnerships or collaborations with these tech giants during your time at Smart?
Not with the giant companies like that at all. No. And you know what I would say as well? Companies like that maybe think that, they're better off going it alone, that they've got all the information, all the background, all the knowledge that they would need. And, it's possible that they would feel they would have a different course, a different direction. And if you look at both Microsoft and Google, you would see that their products are not targeted at education. They're primarily business-focused products. So probably not the best fit there.
Okay, great. Just thanks for indulging me. I've just always wondered that. So earlier you mentioned being very conscious of not letting Smart become too big and wanting to maintain control. However, in 2007, you sold a minority share to Apex Partners in the UK. Did this decision change your business in any significant way?
Yeah, it sure did. And, just to be clear, that scenario was really something that was driven by Intel. Intel had come in as an investor in 1992. And in case I didn't really make this point, I should be very clear. I can't imagine a better investor than Intel, true to their word, gracious, supportive, the whole bit. But all good things come to an end. When you take other people's money, you have to find a route to liquidity. And so here we were, sort of 15 years later, well beyond a normal investment horizon for many companies. And Intel was really asking for liquidity. And that is what prompted the investment by Apex. And they bought out part of the Intel investment, and then Intel let the balance kind of ride. But yeah, it did change the company. I would say that while Dave and I would have had a separate board of directors where we didn't have the majority voice on that board, it really did change the nature of the business, and the focus was very much on company performance.
So you just said something that really stands out to me. All good things must come to an end. I understand that the next few questions might be a little sensitive, but they're an important part of the Smart technology story. So in 2010, Smart had record-setting profits of $800 million and decided to go public. After a very initial successful IPO, which was one of the most successful in Canadian history, the stock price saw a sharp decline following a few disappointing financial reports. This eventually led to a class action lawsuit, which you settled a few years later. But can you explain a bit about what happened during this time and how it impacted the company?
Yeah, it's an interesting collision of events and activities. Literally just a few months prior to Smart's IPO, Apple introduced the iPad. And what we saw and experienced was, where the focus had largely been on an interactive whiteboard in the classroom, all of a sudden we saw an enormous shift in not just attention, but purchasing towards putting a tool into every child's hand in the classroom. And, statements like the interactive whiteboard is dead and, everything is moving here and there. And, I would say that there was a little bit of an overreaction at that time, because I think that there really is a place in the modern classroom, even today, sort of a few years beyond that initial introduction. You use more than one tool when you're building a house. And I think it's the same thing in education. One tool doesn't serve everything. But certainly when that movement started, it really shook, I would say, some confidence in the company. And that's where some of the decline came. I think as well, it's hard to regain, not customer, but market confidence in your product once some of that sort of decline in the stock price happens. And so it felt like it was going to be a long and difficult path back with the investor community.
So as some of the decreases in sales that Smart experienced, I noticed something from just a consumer standpoint that I wanted to piece together. I always felt that the longevity of a SMARTBOARD was one of its best features. You make a one-time investment in the board and the installation, and then you have a working device for 10 years, maybe longer. The software updates to Notebook were free. There were no hidden costs, no subscriptions, or no additional fees. That was great from a consumer standpoint. However, from a business standpoint, I can see how that longevity could be seen as a disadvantage, because unlike an iPad or a laptop, which needs to be replaced every 3 to 5 years, a SMARTBOARD has a much longer replacement cycle. With the notebook software being free, there didn't really seem to be a steady stream of additional income until that board needed to be replaced. So did you see this longevity as a factor in the company's financial challenges?
That probably was. And yeah, the longevity knife kind of cuts both ways. It's good for our customers and really not so good for replacement revenue. We've thought about that long and hard, and I have to say, if I would err on a side, I would still err on that side. At the time that we were selling our products in the early stages into education, there wasn't a lot of money for education technology. So it is what it is, and I don't regret that. What I do think was not well understood and articulated was that our software was never free. Our software was included, and we did have I'd say, a young marketing person who at one point changed some wording, then didn't really understand the strong distinction between included and free. And that did kind of set us down a path, an unintended path, where it became difficult as the company started to try to, I'll call it monetize, but I don't mean it in a negative sense, but imagine that there were 50, 60 plus developers working on enhancements to the software. Their time and attention is not free, and we had an enormous development cost that was not being sustained by sort of ongoing revenue from customers. And so I would have said that we should have much earlier had a subscription model for the software, not to be abusive to our customers, but to have them appreciate that really we were adding tremendous value to the software. And, like anybody, we needed revenues and profits to sustain that investment.
In the final days of your time at Smart, you and your husband stepped down as chairman and CEO in 2012, and you remained on the board for a couple years before leaving in 2014. From what I've read, Smart was a huge part of your life. You consumed 70 to 90 hours of work each week, and you care deeply about the people, the company, and of course, Calgary. You mentioned earlier in the interview that you could have chosen to move to Silicon Valley for easier access to employees and resources, but you chose to stay in your hometown and create a little tech hub right in Calgary. What were some of the circumstances that led to both you and David leaving the company that you founded nearly 25 years earlier?
Well, I used this expression a little bit earlier. All good things do come to an end. And I would say that people have a best before date as well. And in terms of leading a company, it's quite remarkable, actually, that both of us did stay relevant through an extended period of time. Whether we should have left years earlier or stayed a little bit later, I'd say anybody can argue either way. But I think after 25 years, that was pretty well good time. I would say on a personal level, I could have died at work, and I don't mean that literally. But my mindset was so smart oriented, so smart obsessed, like to the core. I would sacrifice virtually anything, vacation time, which I did, and, 70 to 90-hour weeks. That is not an exaggeration at all. I lied for 25 years to my friends saying, no, I did not work on Christmas Day before coming over and spending time with them. And it was only after leaving Smart that I realized how tired to the core I was, and I know my husband was as well. It took us a significant amount of time to really relax and then come down from that 25-year experience. Believe it or not, giving up a workaholic lifestyle is incredibly challenging. Today in Nureva, I kind of work 50 to 60 hours a week, and I figure that really is fundamentally who I am. But sustaining sort of 70 to 90 hours a week is not a healthy lifestyle. So as difficult as it was to leave, to disengage, and really begin to think about other things, including, life after Smart, I think it was probably the best thing that we could have done.
Since you left Smart, the company has faced some challenging financial times, including the downsizing of locations and positions. For instance, in 2014, 25% of Smart's workforce was laid off, and this eventually led to the sale to Foxconn in 2016. Although you left the company before these events, what are your thoughts on the direction that the company has taken since your departure?
But, I think there have been a lot of really good things that have happened in that company. We know the CEO and some of the executives who are there and sort of their passion and their direction for the company. We really don't question it. We think that they're doing a terrific job trying to navigate in what is really a different world today than what we would have experienced. We're just really proud of so many of the accomplishments. Like we see Smart at some of the corporate focused events that we go to now. We would love in so many different ways to collaborate with them. Our products are complementary and not competitive at all to what Smart does. And, I would say between the two companies, there's a level of synergy there. I would also say that Smart really has been the sort of learning grounds for so many other people who've gone on to some very interesting careers, starting up their own tech companies, CEOs of tech companies. So, there's a great degree of affection for so many of the people that we remain close to these days.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. You are now running Nureva. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And how does your work today and the vision of Nureva relate to your original plan and some of the things that you did with Smart Technologies?
Well, the idea for our Nureva audio product really was born out of many of the frustrations that we experienced at SMART. We were running a global business, yet I can't tell you the number of times that we would urge our colleagues at the end of the other end of the phone to say, to repeat what they had just said. It's so frustrating. Could you speak into the phone? Could you say that again? And so really, as we were thinking about Nureva, and we totally started Nureva differently than we started SMART. SMART, we had the idea, no people. Nureva, we had the people and no idea. So anyway, we've experienced both ways of starting a company now. And so it was from the perspective of, hey, we could think about doing things very differently. And at SMART, we really started an industry. And at Nureva, we're trying to wiggle our way into an industry with established leaders, known technology. But again, we have created a fundamentally different technology to solve what really is the number one problem in remote meetings, remote and learning, and that is the audio pickup problem. And we've invented a new technology that is differentiated from virtually everything else that's in the market. Now, that does present some challenges. There are people who try to say, oh, that's just marketing lingo. We call it microphone mist technology. It's actually not. The U.S. Patent Office has recognized it with a number of patents that have been issued. We've got lots more pending. So, it's an adjacent idea, not really spawned from the original idea for SMART, but it's an adjacency.
So Nancy, thank you again for meeting with me today. I just have a few questions left. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, when you look back at your tenure with Smart Technologies, is there anything that particularly stands out to you? Because it must be a remarkable feeling to see an idea that many thought wasn't even possible not only come to life and thrive, but also to exceed all expectations. So as we kind of wrap things up here, I was hoping that you could reflect on your experiences with Smart Technologies and share what it means to you to have turned that vision into a reality.
The 25 years that we spent with the SMART it's just something in hindsight, and the further that we move away from our time at SMART, it feels almost surreal. We go around the world and we see products in, different places. They don't have to have the SMARTBOARD brand on them, but, we know that those ideas really came from us being the two of us as well as our team. We really created an idea from nothing. It caught on. It was popular. So many people said that it impacted their lives, their experiences. I was in a school for profoundly, severely disabled children, and the mother of one of the children came to me and had no English, but all she did was hug me and press herself against me for a long period of time. And she was sobbing and saying that when her child was in the classroom with the SMARTBOARD, that was the most expressive and most engaged, most active that he was at any time in his life. And I have to tell you, just even repeating that now gives me the shivers, because you just don't know what the impact is going to be. You hope that it's a positive thing, but something that is as impactful as that is just not something you easily forget.
So I wanted to ask you this. In the story of SMART and all the marketing, you've mentioned that your husband, David Martin, came up with the idea in 1986. However, if you look up interactive whiteboard in Wikipedia, it states that Xerox PARC was the first to create something similar. They cited the creation of the live board with a patent in 1990. And at one point, they said that they were even a competitor. So I guess what I'm wondering is there any connection between the LiveBoard and the SMARTBOARD? And did you draw any inspiration from their work? Was it an overlap?
There's
or
no
did they...
connection.
Okay.
And, I did ask my husband about that. They didn't come into the market at all before we did. If we could recollect, we would say that they came into the market in 1992, I want to say. And so
I think it was 93, I think, actually.
Yeah, it was not anywhere close to us. And in fact, they came and they asked us questions about our product based upon their products, and we learned kind of after the fact that they had their own product. And we did go, I want to say it was probably 92, and we talked to them about their product. They have not productized it at all. And when I say that, not commercialized it. And we wanted to see about maybe taking on their technology. They were dismissive and, just said, well, we don't know. So we created our own rear projection product and got that into the market before they ever started selling LiveBoard. So, I would say that there's lots of innovation with people having similar ideas, bringing different ideas to life at different times. But you gotta take a risk and you gotta bring it out into the market. And they definitely did not do that. And I guess I look at the stuff that's on Wikipedia. We wouldn't say that that's correct, but
right. Yep.
We'll leave that alone.
Well, Nancy, you've been so generous with your time and open in answering these questions. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, and I look forward to seeing your continued work with Nureva. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Nancy Knowlton from last year and gained some valuable insights in her journey and the evolution of SMARTBOARD technology. So if you found this episode interesting, I'd love it if you can let me know. So if you're listening to the audio as a podcast, feel free to leave a review. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, it would be great if you could leave a comment, like, or subscribe to the EdTech Hustle YouTube channel. So stay tuned for more expert interviews and more inspiring EdTech stories. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.